Hello, everyone. Welcome to the webinar. Thank you so much for joining. We're just gonna wait a couple of moments for people to funnel in. We have 7 people in the webinar so far, so that's great, and we're looking forward to seeing how many more folks join us in the next few minutes here. All right, it is 5:30 on the dot. Don't see any more people flowing in, but I'll get started with just a couple of quick introductions, and if more people join us, then that's great. We're gonna do introductions on the next slide or so. So thanks for being here, everyone. This is for the Lee County Community Wildfire Protection Plan. We're very excited to talk about the plan today and see what questions there might be about it. Our meeting is being recorded, so we will take this recording and post it to the project website. That link will be provided on the slides later in the presentation, as well as in the chat later. And we will post this recording as well as any questions and answers so everyone can access it who couldn't be here today. All right, next slide, Sam. Okay, thank you. So I'm going to introduce myself and then I'll hand it to Ben for a brief introduction. So, my name is Ariana Porter. I am the project manager at SWCA Environmental Consultants, and we are partnering with Lee County for the Community Wildfire Protection Plan development. I've been working on community wildfire protection plans for 6 years at the company, and I'm very excited to be chatting with you all today. So, I'll pass it to Ben.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Ben Abus with Lee County Department of Public Safety. First of all, thank you for joining the virtual public meeting tonight. And we're really excited about this plan. I want to thank SWCA, our consultants who have been working, as Ari mentioned, diligently on getting to the first drafts and reviews of the different priorities for the teams to review. This project is funded through a community development block grant disaster recovery subgrant, which was received following Hurricane Ian. And building on the lessons from our recent fire seasons and informed by the latest science and stakeholder input, this plan really starts to evolve into a framework for better wildfire preparedness for our community. For those of you that are here in Southwest Florida, we've got smoke in the air, unfortunately, this evening from the national fire down in Big Cypress, which grew to 25,000 acres today. And we all know that the risks of wildfire are all around us. But through this process, we found some great opportunities for collaboration between our local agencies, our first responders, and within the community to help us reduce that risk. And so we appreciate you joining and look forward to your feedback on the plan. Ari?
Thank you so much, Ben. I'm going to introduce our other experts today, so I'll have Mitch Burgard introduce himself first here.
Thanks, Ari. Hello, everybody. Really looking forward to hearing from you guys in the question and answer. I retired from 32 years of wildland fire experience with the National Park Service and the Forest Service. About 3 years ago, I joined SWCA, and I help mostly with fire modeling and risk analysis. Been doing that for CWPPs around the country. When I worked for Federal Fire, I worked at Yellowstone, Glacier Park, Mesa Verde, and Denali. And I got to the Everglades and Big Cypress for about 5 spring fire seasons after Hurricane Andrew, and really enjoyed that area and seeing the unique fire activity that you have down there. And I will pass it to Sam.
Thank you, Mitch. Good evening, everybody. Thanks for joining. My name is Sam Lashley. I'm an NFPA certified wildfire mitigation specialist. I live in Missoula, Montana. I have a background in wildland fire operations, having worked on wildland fire hand crews, engines, and a hotshot crew. I also worked as a mitigation lead in Big Sky, Montana. Now I work on creating wildfire mitigation plans and community wildfire protection plans all across the country. So really excited to dive in.
Thank you both. Yeah, so the purpose of the meeting today, Sam, if you could hit the next slide, that'd be great, is to both give information to you all and receive your feedback. So a community wildfire protection plan uh, needs to be informed by the community, and so that's why we're here today. I'll do a little bit about the plan and the process, and then Mitch will cover wildland fire basics, and Sam will cover homeowner education and tips. And I'll wrap us up with some next steps on the project. So this is our agenda today. Next slide. Just some meeting notes. The meeting is being recorded, as I said earlier, and as Jessica said in the chat, closed captioning is available. So click CC at the bottom of your Zoom screen to turn on or off closed captions. And the chat feature is currently off. However, you can submit questions to us via the Q&A feature. So please use that feature to use the questions, to ask questions of our panelists at the end of the brief presentation here. Next slide. We also ask that you be respectful of every participant, including our panelists, during the event. So inappropriate or explicit language will not be tolerated, nor will hateful comments. So let's just all be respectful. Alrighty, so I will talk about the Community Wildfire Protection Plan overview first before we get into the homeowner education. Next slide. Community wildfire protection plans are plans to reduce threats to life and property from wildfire. They must be collaborative, so that's why we're here. We want your input. If you don't have questions, that's totally fine. We want your feedback as well. They must identify and prioritize fuel treatments or ways to reduce wildfire risk by addressing vegetation on the ground. They must identify measures to reduce structural ignitability, so ways we can make our homes and businesses and our man-made structures more resilient to wildfire. Sam's going to talk through some of those tips. I want to be clear that a community wildfire protection plan does not mandate anything. It simply makes recommendations. So the point of the plan is to take a look at what the existing wildfire risk is in Lee County and make recommendations to reduce that risk. The recommendations are used to apply to grant funding sources, and these plans are required for many grant funding sources. So they're a very important stepping stone towards getting things done on the ground. Next slide, Sam. Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit about where we are in our process. The first thing you do for a community wildfire protection plan is to gather your stakeholders and form what's called a core team. And this team guides the process. This team is made up of fire response personnel, land managers, public outreach specialists, public safety. Ben is here as a panelist. And so these are our local experts who are helping us work through this process and guide it. At the beginning of the project, we started to engage you all, the public. So we set up the project website. The press release that we had at the beginning of the project announced this website as well as a public survey. That public survey is still available. So at the end of the presentation, I will give you a QR code to take that survey. After we engaged the public and kicked off the project, we started to collect as much data as we possibly could, and we used this data to create maps. And these maps document baseline conditions. Mitch is going to show some examples of these maps later in his piece of the presentation. Using these maps, we look at what wildfire risk exists currently in Lee County. So we do this in two ways. One, using desktop methods and wildfire models, and also being in the field on the ground. And so we spent a week in all of Lee County looking at on the ground risk attributes as well. And you'll see that reflected in the draft CWPP or Community Wildfire Protection Plan when it's available. Using the understanding of wildfire risk, we draft recommendations and a proposed project action plan. And we tie all of this together in a neat bow, and we create a draft community wildfire protection plan for the public to review. And I'll give you more information about the public review process later in these slides. We are here now, so we're close to inviting stakeholder and public comment on the plan, and we are hosting currently our virtual webinar for the plan. So we're excited you all are here. And after we invite comment, we address comments and we finalize the project. And then you can use this to move forward and apply to grants. Next slide. Okay, I'm going to hand it off to Mitch. Before I do that, is there anything to add from any of the panelists? Okay, great. Mitch, take us away.
Great. Thanks, Ari. We can go to the next slide, Sam. So already you've heard the term risk used a bunch, and that's really the main purpose of this call, or Sam and I's dialogue here, is to just talk about wildfire risk in Lee County and what the community can do to mitigate the wildfire risk. We're not sure who was on the call. We'll take some Q&A, but assuming that there's some folks that are homeowners on here and stuff, understanding risk, both the hazard and the vulnerability, will help you prioritize and figure out what you can do to protect your homes or things that you're concerned about from wildfire. So you've probably heard the quote before that probability times consequences equal risk, which is a nice framework. In fire, the words change a little bit, but it's hazard times vulnerability equals risk. There's no test on this. You don't have to fully dive into it, but to frame Sam and I's discussion, I'm going to be talking about the hazard component. So kind of the probability of fire and the intensity of fire and some basic South Florida fire behavior information. And then I'll hand it over to Sam, who's going to talk about that vulnerability component, exposure, and what folks can do to protect their homes. Next slide, please. So you may have seen the fire triangle before, if you remember back to school or physics class. The three components needed for a fire to start are fuel, heat, and oxygen. That's what it takes to create fire. When we talk about the fire environment in South Florida, the things that drive a fire and cause a fire to be risky or intense are fuels, weather, and topography. So it's just another triangle, another way to frame out how fire spread occurs. And if you're a property owner or have some land and are trying to figure out what variables are the most important to consider, this is a nice framework for that. And we're going to go through each of these individually. We'll start with fuels. Next slide, please. So for Lee County, I'm showing a pancake because, as you guys know, South Florida tends to be very, very flat. Lehigh Acres is kind of the high elevation there at about 33 feet. Some folks may reside there. The pancake's actually a good example because it tends to be a little higher in the middle and shorter on the side. So on the west side, you obviously get all the way down to sea level. On the other kind of more eastern boundaries, the elevation drops a little bit, not quite that far. And then to overextend the analogy, because I love the ecology down there, and for folks that have tried to walk through Sawgrass or the Everglades, I learned quick about solution holes and the pockets of water when you're wading around out there, when you find yourself swimming when prior you were wading in knee-deep water. The thing with topography, and for folks that maybe lived out west or were familiar with fire out west, topography does create more fire activity. Fires like to run uphill and upslope, and topography does different things to the winds. But that doesn't mean that the topography is simple in South Florida, and in fact, it comes with other challenges. When you have a flat landscape and mountainous terrain, south slopes are the hottest and driest, and basically South Florida has a permanent south slope. We consider flat lands as south slopes, so it's getting solar radiation throughout the day. You got periods of long shadows in the morning and the afternoon. The peak noon is when the fuels are the driest and the hottest, but it's always getting sunlight except for any vegetation shade. So just because it's flat doesn't mean it's not complex so that there isn't fire activity. And as evidenced by the fires you got happening there right now, you know that there's fire activity despite the terrain. Let's go to the next slide. The next factor we'll talk about is the weather. It's obviously fire season right now in South Florida. Different kind of fire season than the western states or even the Northeast is familiar with. It starts early. For folks that don't know, Alaska has an early season too, kind of in May and April. Not what a lot of the country would consider fire season, but as you guys know, that's when it's the driest period of time. Fire season also starts talking about topography within 4 to 6 weeks of summer solstice, the longest day of the year. So with that happening, you get a lot of solar radiation, you get drying out in January through May. Fire season can go into June a little bit, and in fact, it often gets worse as you start getting rain because you may be getting more lightning and more ignitions. But an interesting fire season, and that's based primarily on precipitation. And then the other big driver from the weather is winds. There's windrows on the left that I'm showing, the circle with the different colored bars. And if you can't read it all, this is from Alligator Alley, from a remote automated weather station on the west side of Alligator Alley. And it's showing that typical wind speeds during fire season are in that 5 to about 15-mile-an-hour range. And most of the winds are coming from the northeast, but they can come from any direction. Due west at this particular station had way less winds than any other direction. But again, this is where having flat terrain can still be complicated because there's nothing blocking wind direction. You can get winds from almost any direction throughout fire season. Next slide, please. All right, so the third leg, let's talk about fuels. Fire people, we're not botanists, so there's all sorts of different names for vegetation, but we break this down into what we call 40 different fuel models. It may not sound like a lot, but when you incorporate weather and model fire behavior, there's billions of different permutations of fire activity that you can get. Don't worry if you can't read the slide on the right, just wanted to show the primary fuel models that occur in Lee County. There's about 12 or 13 predominant ones out of the 40 that are used for the fire behavior modeling. Maybe an easier way to describe fuels is by ecotype. So broadly for Lee County, the color coding on the left doesn't relate to the fuel models on the right. It's just kind of roughly saying if fire is good or bad ecologically for the area, and those are subjective terms. Everything is to some extent fire adapted prior to human development. But starting at the top, the two most common fuel types and the fire return that they would typically see from natural wildfires are coastal dunes and pine flatwoods or palmetto oak. And those type of fuel environments tended to burn about every 3 to 7-ish years traditionally, which is a very frequent return interval for folks that maybe haven't been to South Florida. In the Northern Rockies, fire return interval of 180 years is more common. Then you have your freshwater marshes, which is kind of more like the sawgrass, also very high fire return interval, about 3 to 9 years. And all of those are very fire adapted environments. Ecologically, fire doesn't tend to damage those environments too much. The next one is cypress forests. It isn't so much fire adapted. It'll burn in drought. It tends to be drought resistant or fire resistant. So that's kind of more neutral. And then mangrove forests and hardwood hammocks, the tree islands that are inside the freshwater marshes, really only burn during drought years. And mangrove forests, they tend to stay really small. They don't really encourage a lot of fire. And then the hardwood hammocks, if it's real droughty, they can burn, and it's not great ecologically because they've got a lot of surface litter and material that burns. Next slide, please. And a few unique hazards or situations. I was down after Hurricane Andrew doing some fire in the Everglades. Hurricane debris, you guys just recently experienced Hurricane Helene and Milton back to back. So there's the natural debris from the vegetation that blows down, which can increase fire intensity. And then there's the challenge of man-made materials out there that may create some toxic gases or flammability if mattresses and trampolines and things have blown. It was pretty incredible after Hurricane Andrew how much human-caused debris was in some of the units that we were going in to burn, and we had to clean that up in advance. You're also facing post-hurricane or through other natural factors, saltwater intrusion where there's traditionally been freshwater, which can stress out the vegetation that isn't familiar with that, basically kill it off and make it more flammable. And then for me, my first time coming down to Florida to burn, and again, maybe everybody down there is really local, but it was very strange to me how the green fuels would burn, how we would put on rubber boots and be waiting and igniting sawgrass above water and watching it just take off. Or we'd get an inch or two of rain because we were planning to do a burn unit, and the locals would jump out and say, let's get to burning. And I'd be thinking there's no way, and we would be able to burn. So South Florida is very fire adapted, and the volatility in these fuels, things like sawgrass or non-native Melaleuca or tea tree. A lot of this kind of subtropical vegetation, when it does burn, is just full of volatile components that burn really, really well. Next slide, please. And then for fire history, the most recent probably large fire, and I actually want to ask you guys from the group some fires of recent memory to you guys, but the kind of the largest, more recent one would be the 2006 Caloosahatchee fire. That led to $2 million in damages, burned about 2,000 acres, and destroyed 15 homes. So, and then we've got the national fire, like Ben was saying, at 25,000 acres burning right now. So obviously a fire environment in that area. And then the fire ignitions tend to follow fire season. So now instead of being low for precip, these bars are really high where you're getting a lot of ignitions. South Florida gets lots of lightning, as you know. So a lot of those are lightning ignitions. Some of them are human. And then the ignitions drop off later, maybe not because there's less lightning, but because things are wet and just not starting fires. Next slide, please. Okay, I'm going to show some maps, as Ari said. I wanted to point out that these are going to be in the CWPP and available for review soon. I know on slides are probably hard to zoom in. We just kind of want to look at this. I want to describe them from a county perspective so you know what the fire behavior outputs are. Not so much zoom into particular pixels, but this will be available for review and for information in the CWPP. And the first one we're showing here is fire intensity. And let's just, for now, we'll kind of call that flame length. And what'll pop out to you in all of these is at the north end of the county and the southeast of the county coming from Collier is where you're going to see most of your fire activity, your probabilities and your intensities. And that's because there's contiguous wildland fuels that come from out of the county or within the county. So you're going to get the most wildland fire where the most wildland fuels are. And you're noticing that the urban areas and the towns aren't showing fire activity. That's because we don't have a model to show burning buildings. Technically, buildings are fuel from a fire perspective, but these fire models are looking at vegetation so that we can help the community determine where the highest risk is so that we can do mitigation efforts to protect homes. And one thing I'll point out, because you're going to see it on all of the slides, but Little Pine Island, there's a red circle to the west of the mainland there, and that's Little Pine Island, which is undeveloped, but this kind of drives home that coastal dune burning and some of the natural vegetation. The way the models run, they started a bunch of fires there, and because there isn't much urban there, it showed some high fire intensity in that area. Next slide, please. And then this is a burn probability model. And when you look at this, just imagine, because it is what the model does, it throws tens of thousands of fires across the county and in the neighboring counties and lets them grow out. But let's say for easy math that it only burned 10 fires. If a particular area had 8 of 10 fires burn across it, it's got an 80% burn probability. If it has 4, it has a 40% burn probability. So it's burning thousands of fires across the county and then seeing where the highest probability of fire is as those spread. And it's very similar to the intensity map. The highest probabilities are to the north where there's more continuous fuels, and then to the south towards your neighboring county in Collier. Next slide, please. And then we take those two previous ones. So we have fire intensity, and remember that initial, and Sam's going to show it next as well. We take your intensity times your probability, and this is where you come up with an exposure score. So now we have risk. When you multiply those two together, it's kind of just a merging of those two, and you can see where the greatest risk is. If you know what you're worried about, it is sitting out there. If it's a home, you can see what your risk is. Next slide. That's really it for the kind of the landscape ones, but a nice segue to Sam is we're also providing ember load, the sources of ember load to buildings. And embers are the sparks coming off the wildland fires. And folks are probably familiar with it, but it wasn't that long ago that the biggest concern was flames touching homes and burning them down, and that certainly can happen. But research and literature has found that hands down, embers are the biggest thing, the biggest threat to structures burning. Sam's going to cover that. So these are the sources of areas where there's a lot of fuels or fuels that are have the potential to throw a lot of embers or sparks are located, and that helps kind of mitigate and plan how to reduce that. And that's all I have. I think that's a good segue to Sam.
Yeah, thank you, Mitch. Hi, everyone. Sam Lashley here. I'm going to be talking about homeowner education and tips. I also want to touch on that quantitative risk assessment graphic again that Mitch mentioned. So Mitch did a great job of characterizing the hazard side of this equation, so the probability and the intensity. In order to mitigate hazard, effective things are landscape treatments, large projects. But as homeowners, what we want to ask ourselves is, what can we control? And what we can control is the vulnerability of our homes. And so in order to do that, we have to understand what is the exposure of our homes to wildland fire? And then what is the susceptibility of our homes? How much damage would be caused if fire was nearby? So we can't control hazard, but we can control vulnerability. So let's take a closer look at vulnerability, specifically exposure. And exposure is how close the home is to wildland fire hazards. So how close is it to vegetation that can burn? This can be characterized using the home ignition zones. And this is the classical representation used by the NFPA as well as fire protection districts around the country. What it does is it breaks exposure into 3 different zones. So the first zone is the immediate zone, and this is 0 to 5 feet from the structure. This is also called the non-combustible zone. And the reason it's called the non-combustible zone is because the objective for mitigation actions is to make this zone non-combustible, because once there's fire in this zone, it's very likely that the home will also catch fire. The next zone is the intermediate zone. This is 5 to 30 feet from the home. And finally, the extended zone. This is 30 to 100 feet from the home. And so particularly in Florida and many places of the country, these zones will overlap. So your home's ignition zones will overlap with that of your neighbor. And so it's really important to consider collaboration and coordination on mitigation activities. So there's a reciprocal benefit of those activities between you and your neighbors. These zones also follow a priority of actions. And so it's important to take action first closest to the home and then work your way out concentrically. So starting with the immediate zone, ensuring that non-combustibility, and then working in the intermediate zone, and then finally the extended zone. And in many cases, the extended zone can actually be an extenuation of work done by the state, county, different governments for those larger landscape level treatments. So yeah, one of the main objectives is to reduce flammability 0 to 5 feet from the home. And why do we want to do this? So here's an example. Please note that this is a controlled environment. This was an experiment done in the Missoula laboratory. I will come back to this image and we'll explore it a little further. I just want to highlight that once fire is near the home, there's a high chance of it burning down. There's a few different vulnerability factors that we'll get into for a second, but just wanted to show this to explain why we want that zone non-combustible. All right, so let's start to look at some of the ways we can reduce our exposure. So one of the best ways is to utilize Firewise landscaping. And this photo on the right is a great example of Firewise landscaping in Florida. So one of the best actions to take is to utilize rock mulch instead of using bark mulch or some other flammable mulch. Bark mulch is extremely flammable. It can also catch embers and ignite. And so essentially having bark mulch around your home is having a flammable perimeter right around your home. So replacing it with rock mulch is useful for reducing ignitions and flammability. Also, consider using pavers. They look good, but also if you can't or do not want to replace all your bark mulch, consider using some pavers just to break up that continuity. And then importantly, we're not telling you to remove all the vegetation near your home. If you'd like to have vegetation near the home, consider fire-resistant or solitary vegetation, such as the ones exemplified in this photo. Cacti and succulents make really great options. Don't plant sawgrass near your house. I'll say that. Here's a couple other examples. So a really good action to take to reduce your exposure is to clean up the yards, trim the shrubs and trees, What this does is reduces the fuel loading, so the amount of fuels near your home, and also the continuity so that fire can't travel through your property. Here's just another example of before and after. So what's been done here is all that fuel in the middle has been removed, and now there's a good non-flammable buffer between the fence and the home, the fence being flammable. And we'll talk about fences here in a second. I have a video to show you all. So yeah, mow the grass, trim the trees. Another good action to take is to harden outbuildings or increase the separation of them from the main structure. So take garages, like detached garages or sheds, for example. Those, once they are on fire, emit a lot of heat, a lot of radiant heat, as well as embers. And those can be extremely hazardous to your home. So also consider hardening those so that they don't catch fire. Also propane tanks, if you have above ground propane tanks, we want to keep those cold. Okay, looking back at vulnerability. So we had a look at exposure, the different actions you can take to reduce that exposure. And so on the other hand, there is susceptibility. And susceptibility is really, what is your home made of? And how susceptible is it to burning from wildfire? So the NFPA, along with several fire agencies around the country, have developed some home hardening recommendations in making the right choice. So we'll cover a few of these. This image corresponds to the experiment that I showed you earlier, the simulation of embers hitting the buildings. So those are those same buildings. So the one on the left is going to be the not the right choice. That's going to be the non-firewise, non-hardened home. And then the one on the right is the hardened home. So one of the best actions to take is to ensure you have a Class A roof. So a Class A roof is something that's made out of clay shingle or asphalt shingle, which I think is asphalt is fairly common in Florida. However, ensure that the eaves are boxed in. So open eaves can collect embers and heat and ignite the roof. So even if you do have a Class A roof, if your eaves are open or exposed, you can still have the roof catch fire. Siding isn't immensely important, especially if other hardening actions haven't been taken yet. So siding is such a large piece of the home, and it's difficult to ignite siding from embers because it's so flat. What ignites from embers first are small things, so such as the eaves or the deck, as well as bark mulch. And so I'll keep hitting on bark mulch during this presentation, but really bark mulch is so receptive to embers and can ignite and cause fire. And then once that fire is started and is hot, it can then ignite your siding. So there's kind of an order to the ignitions. A few other things I want to touch on are windows. I think pretty much all the windows in Florida are dual pane tempered because of the hurricanes that you all experience. But just ensure there's screens on those, along with any other opening. If there's an opening to your home, please consider putting a screen on it. Ideally, you'd be using a ember resistant screen or mesh, because once embers enter the home and ignite something, there's a high probability of a total loss. For decks, consider the space where the deck meets the structure and what that flashing is made of. Ensure it's a non-flammable flashing. Also look at the different gaps between the deck boards or even gaps under the deck. Those are places you might want to close up and just prevent embers from building up and potentially igniting the deck. You can also use flame retardant treatments and applications. So I'm sure you're all wondering, wow, this all sounds really expensive, all these upgrades, and oftentimes they are. And so I just want to highlight that, there are some really good low cost, high impact actions that you can take first. And really a lot of these can be taken once a fire warning is issued. So if there's a fire near your area and you're concerned about it potentially impacting your house, take a few of these actions. One of the best things you can do is place your porch or deck furniture inside. Think of those couch cushions out on your deck. They're so flammable, and they gather embers and it can ignite from embers easily. So place those inside or just move them away from the home. Similarly, like window planters or anything attached to the building, even if you have like a broom propped up next to the home, the bristles on that broom are going to ignite from embers first before the siding, for example. So moving all that inside or away from the home is a great action to take. It may seem really simple, but closing your windows and doors is one of the best things you can do. The name of the game is to prevent embers from entering the home or igniting the home. And so close the doors, close the windows, make sure that you have screens. I really want to prevent embers from entering the home. These are starting to get a little more expensive now. So cleaning the gutters is a great action to take. As you know, leaves and litter build up in that gutter, they can ignite from embers. Again, I've said it several times, protect those vents. It's a little expensive, but it's a great action to take. I think it's a good bang for your buck to get those mesh screens on there. I will keep hitting on this for sure. Bark mulch, please consider replacing it with rock mulch. I'll show that image here in a little bit, and it just exemplifies how flammable bark mulch is. So yeah, that why is because of embers. And so we're going back to this image here. So what was done was embers were showered onto these two structures. They experienced the same amount of ember load. And then what's important to point out is that there was no flaming front. There was no like flames applied to these structures. So all the flames that you're seeing are caused by embers. And what happened first was embers ignited this bark mulch because those flames are the highest. They also ignited the deck because there was a gap under there where the bark mulch was. And then you can start to see how that's then igniting the siding. So the bark mulch was the real culprit here in deciding how this house burned. Another culprit is up here. This was a vent. So this was a vent to the attic that was not covered by an ember resistant mesh screen. And so embers were actually able to enter the attic, and now it's burning in a separate location up in the roof. So we are going to share a video here shortly. Just give us a chance to pull it up. And what this video will show you is some more examples of how fire burns near homes and how it can potentially ignite homes. So please understand that these are all controlled environments. No people or property were harmed while making them. So yeah, what you can see is the fences are just catching little embers. You can see how the bark mulch is incredibly receptive. Fences are a big one. So what you'll see here shortly is how first the bark mulch ignites and then it ignites the fence and it's traveling along those fences. And you can see the fence on the left, how it's carrying fire directly to the structure. And once those boards are on fire, they can catch the siding on fire. However, the example on the right, there is a non-combustible kind of buffer built into the fence so that it can't carry fire to the structure. So some of the main objectives in hardening is to reduce the continuity of fuels, so reducing the way fuels carry fire to the home, and then reducing those ignition points, so the bark mulch, the fences, the vents, those ignition points, and hardening them. All right. All right. So now I'm going to cover a little bit of information on building codes. I'm not going to go super in depth. If you have questions, we'd be happy to answer those and dive a little bit more into it. I'm only going to be talking about Lee County building codes. So this does not apply to specific municipal codes or Florida state code. So this is from Chapter 10, Division 5, the minimum standards for all developments. And really what I want to point out here is that there is no building code mandating construction type specifically for hardening against wildfire. All of the building codes are related primarily to water access for fire apparatus. So ensuring there's fire department access so that the engines can get into places and turn around, ensuring there's adequate fire flows, so adequate water, and that's through the use of water main installations, and then also ensuring that there's adequate fire hydrant design and spacing. So it's really all water centric. I also want to point out that for developments that are not in a fire protection district or tax unit, those will utilize NFPA 1142, which is standards on water supplies for suburban and rural firefighting, just ensuring there's water there for firefighting. So yeah, no codes that directly mandate that Firewise building construction specifically for the county. I'm not quite sure about the different municipalities, but we can get that information to you if you do have questions. So that's everything I had. I'll pass it back to Ari now.
Thank you both. That was very informative. I want to emphasize that the Lee County All Hazards Guide contains information about evacuation zones, your flood zone, and other hazardous events, including wildfires, which is available at this link on the Lee County website. Next slide. And I will talk through next steps of the project. So we will be continuously updating the project website, which is also called an ArcGIS hub site. And in a couple of slides, I will have a QR code and a link for that. We also have provided a link for this website in the chat, so please do check that out. That web page is where we will post the draft community wildfire protection plan for your review. So please be watching that website for updates. And after we receive your comments and address them, we'll be posting the final plan on that website as well. Next slide. Okay, so the community survey that I mentioned earlier, it is still open. We want your feedback. And so there's a short survey that the link is in the chat, or there's a QR code available here on the screen. Please fill out our survey. It will remain open until the end of the public comment period on the draft community wildfire protection plan. And if you've already filled it out, that's great. Please send it to a few neighbors or community members to fill out as well. Next slide. Okay, so this draft community wildfire protection plan is currently scheduled to be available in about a month or a little less from Monday, March 23rd to Friday, April 3rd. Please mark your calendars to review the plan or portions of the plan and leave your comments. There will be a comment form available on this website. So we really look forward to your engagement. It's very important we receive public comment. So please take some time to do that yourself and also encourage others in your community to do so as well. This meeting, as I said, is being recorded. It will be uploaded to the Lee County YouTube account, and we will post that YouTube link on our project website. And we are going to move into question and answers. And so question and answers will be recorded live, as well as any written question and answer that happens and shared on the hub site as well. Next slide. Okay, so for this question and answer session, next slide, Sam, there's a Q&A button down at the bottom. We'd love to have the Q&A, so please open that up and type in questions that you have for our panel or feedback. I can see that a few of our participants are members of our core team, so you are members of the public as well, so please don't hold back. Please feel free to give your feedback to us, and maybe it'll spark someone else's question here as a member of the public. We've also shared the Facebook page for Lee County where you can, Lee County Public Safety, where you can look for updates because we know there is ongoing smoke impacts and fire impacts in Lee County and South Florida more generally. So at this point, I'm going to stop talking and see if there are any question and answers that come up in the Q&A. And if none come up, I will ask these example questions of Mitch and Sam. So here are some example questions on the screen, hopefully to get you started. But we would love your input and questions in the question and answer feature. If you are having any trouble using that feature, let us know, and we can help you out. Mitch, I know you had a couple of questions for folks as well, so feel free to prompt people with questions you had as well if we don't receive any Q&A.
Great.
Okay, we've got our first question. Um, and it is from Holly, who says, "Hello, thank you for hosting the webinar. It's been helpful." That's great. We're glad to hear that, Holly. Lee County is under a burn ban, but my neighbors aren't following it and are still burning their vegetation debris. Any suggestions other than confronting them since they are aware of the ban? That's a great question. Thanks, Holly. It looks like Ben is available to take that question. Thank you.
Yeah, good evening. I'm happy to answer that. So if there are infractions of the burn ban that is in place, which includes residential burning of yard debris or vegetative debris, that two actions you can take. One would be to notify the county communications center either by calling 911 or the non-emergency number, and we can get the fire department out to ensure that the fire is extinguished. Secondly, you can contact the sheriff's office. These are actually um, it's considered a misdemeanor in Lee County to burn while a burn ban is in place. And we would be happy to address that in collaboration with the sheriff's office. But those are two actions that you can take. We want to ensure that if there is burning going on and it's not approved by the Florida Forest Service, that fire is extinguished promptly, so that way it doesn't spread to either other vegetation on the property or potentially to other structures.
Thank you, Ben, and thanks for the question, Holly. Any other questions? Okay, I am going to ask a question of the panel, and we'll record your answer and post it for anybody who couldn't make it tonight. So, let's talk about home insurance. Will the CWPP risk assessment affect my home insurance? Sam, do you want to talk to us about that one?
Yeah, I can start. So the short answer is no. And I will also say that CWPP risk assessments are primarily created to identify prioritization for mitigation actions around the county. Um, that's not to say that insurance companies may take a look at some risk assessments and CWPPs, but it's important to note that they use a lot of different data, very complex algorithms for understanding their actuarial tables and how they underwrite insurance. It's certainly not dictated or even heavily influenced at all by CWPP risk assessments. They use a lot of separate tools.
Thank you, Sam. Anybody else have anything to add? Alrighty. Okay, Ben has a question for Sam or Mitch.
Yeah, I'll put you guys on the spot. So in the plan, there's quite a bit of discussion about the wildland urban interface, and that term is used extensively. And while it may be known to some in the industry, it's not necessarily a common term that you hear in the checkout line at the grocery store. So I was wondering if you could kind of explain what the wildland urban interface means and what that means for fire spread and the potential.
Yes, so Ben,
Uh,
you're reading our minds because we had a whole fire team at SWCA call about the wildland urban interface this morning, which has changed. Their definitions have changed and evolved. And so Mitch is going to jump in and speak to what we are seeing now as a basic definition.
Woo-wee. And that's what we call it. If you hear the term woo-wee, that is also wildland urban interface. And yeah, it's a great question. It's really largely just a definitional area. And it's really helpful for communities and CWPPs at its most core level to identify where the wildland fuels are meeting homes and businesses and structures of value that could be impacted by fire. So it usually wouldn't include like roads, because roads, that's important for evacuation, but the roads themselves often aren't too damaged by fires. So it's looking at human-built structures, homes and businesses, where they're adjacent to wildland fuels. There's complexities in there when you hear people talk about wildland urban interface. Sometimes there's questions about like, does our water supply, do we consider that in there or not? And it's sort of up to the local counties or cities or whoever's developing the community protection plan to define that in a way that works best for them. But the base standard wildland urban interface definition is from the edge of urban. The other thing is that it needs to be a certain density, right? One farmhouse on 10,000 acres is probably not urban, so that might not be urban interface. But if you're in the edge of a community, it's usually buffered anywhere from a half mile to a mile and a half out. And that's sort of the starting point for urban interface, looking at where those fuels and the homes and businesses are interacting. Did that answer your question?
Hey Mitch, I'll just add on real quick that so the definition we're referring to is from the Healthy Forest and Restoration Act of 2003, which provided a definition for wildland urban interface. However, in that same act, they also stated that a community wildfire protection plan can define its own WUI or wildland urban interface. So every county across the country that's developing their own CWPP has the option to delineate their own WUI. And so it's really important that it's a collaborative process, and that's why we have such a diverse core team working on that delineation for this project.
Thank you both. That's a great question. Thank you, Ben. I see we have a Q&A question from David. Yes. Would it be beneficial to identify urban interface areas on the map within the CWPP? We could definitely answer that question. Sam or Mitch, do you want to take that one, or do you want me to jump in?
Yeah, I can take that.
Thanks, Sam.
Yeah, so we're definitely including a map of the wildland urban interface, both in the written plan and also on the hub site, so you can zoom around. And there were specific parameters that were used to define that, starting with the HIFRA definition, the Healthy Forest and Restoration Act, as a starting point. I guess, Ari, do you want to speak to some of those specific parameters, or should we keep it there?
I think that's a great explanation and answer, unless David has any more questions that you would like answered, or you need any clarifications. The wildland urban interface is delineated in the CWPP, so you will be able to see it in the draft plan itself. I believe it's delineated in Chapter 2. However, you can go to that table of contents, take a look, view the map, leave your comments. The wildland urban interface will also be available on the website when the project is complete. So we'll have that mapping available for people to zoom in, explore, interact with. And so that delineation of where the urban becomes adjacent with wildland fuels is frequent in Lee County. So, you know, a lot of preserves backing up against neighborhoods, those sorts of environments. And so you'll see that delineated on the map. And we really appreciate the question. Yeah, you're welcome. Absolutely. Any other questions? Okay, Sandra, can you expand more on saltwater intrusion and why it is a unique fire hazard? For example, how it can damage or impact electrical equipment such as transformers during a storm. Yeah, that's a great question. Mitch, do you want to take a stab at that one?
Yeah, and hopefully Ben can help, or if other folks can't, we can provide a written answer. But I can only speak kind of to the vegetation component. And what happens is that species that are used to drawing fresh water are not going to drink up that salt water. When the salt water comes, they do, and it'll desiccate the trees or kill them off. And then when you have dead fuels, you know, and if it's trees and shrubs, while we call it red and dead, but while they're in that sort of dying stage, are super flammable, and then eventually they'll fall over and then create a greater fuel load. So that's sort of the vegetation impacts. Saltwater on electrical lines and stuff, I'm not so sure. I'm sure it's not good, but Ben, you got an answer?
Yeah, and actually, we in our community we experienced quite a bit of this during Hurricanes Helene and Milton. If you'll recall, we didn't get a lot of rain from I believe it was Hurricane Milton, and it ended up depositing quite a bit of salt on the electrical grid on the overhead lines. But there was no rain to rinse the salt off of the lines, which ended up causing some real significant problems for power supply and distribution in the county. So saltwater intrusion is bad in a number of different ways. One of the concerns that we have, and one of the reasons why we submitted the grant for this plan was, the long-term effects of saltwater intrusion, as well as the all of the down trees and vegetation from the storms, and what that might look like in a couple of years as that becomes fuel for potentially even bigger fires in the community. And we want to make sure that we're taking steps if we can to prepare for that.
Thank you both. That's a great question. Anything else from the Q&A, folks? We have about 6 more minutes left in our time tonight. Okay. I do love the use of me asking questions and us recording the answers for folks who haven't weren't able to come. So, Mitch, can you talk to us about what a prescribed fire is and why they are conducted?
Sure. And folks in the call may be very familiar with the prescribed fire or not. But a prescribed fire, the prescribed part of the term means that it's when cities, counties, federal agencies conduct a burn in the wildlands for a couple of reasons. I showed you the fire history in that area. A lot of things, a lot of vegetation types need fire every 3 to 5 years, so it's just reintroducing fire into natural vegetation. But it also comes with a huge fuel reduction benefit too, right? So fire actually is one of the best tools for removing fuels in terms of expense and being healthier in the environment. A lot of reasons to do prescribed burns. And folks are probably familiar with that have been in South Florida for a long time. I'll say that because there's two areas of the country that we call that have a big burning culture, and it's Florida up into Georgia, South Florida in particular, and then Kansas. Kansas has tall grass prairie, and both of those areas burn millions of acres. I think it's 3 million acres that the tall grass prairie burns, ranchers annually. That's 1.5 times the size of Yellowstone. I don't remember the stats for South Florida specifically, but these are communities that are real accustomed to applying fire on the landscape for fuel reduction and restoration. And Florida is on the top for doing lots and lots of prescribed fires.
Thank you, Mitch. Sam, do you have anything to add about home insurance on home hardening?
Yeah, that's a great question, and we get that question a lot. I think there's two benefits to hardening your home. Really, the primary benefit is uh, directly reducing your susceptibility to wildfire, so increasing the chances of home survivability is really the main one. But secondly, in many places, there are the opportunities to have reduced insurance premiums or to even just get insurance in the first place. And so it really depends on the carrier. So every carrier has a different risk appetite or profile. However, what I've seen across the industry and across the country is that insurance companies are passionate about finding those customers who have done home hardening and who are reducing their risk because that's quantifiable. You can record if you've replaced your home, or you can record if you've added those mesh vents. And that's something that's very simple for insurance companies to incorporate into their actuarials and how they estimate those costs. So it really depends on the carrier, but there's a high likelihood that uh, you can get some sort of benefit, insurance benefit from doing this work.
Thank you, Sam. Ben, did you have something to add?
I did, because I've experienced exactly what Sam just described. So we were lucky enough to get picked up by a new carrier with a slight decrease in our premium. But I got a letter 30 days. We had just had our trees trimmed and everything looked good, and I got a letter that said that They had identified through the pictures during the inspection that there were a couple of trees that they wanted trimmed even further. So they wanted to ensure that our home was, as far away from possible, like that immediate zone that we had talked about in the slide deck. Um, so insurers are paying attention to that, and they may require it as part of underwriting.
Thank you, Ben. We have 1 more minute left, and two questions just came in. And so I'm going to answer the first one, and then Laura, we can talk about your question if you like. So Holly says, I'm lucky to live next to a county conservation 2020 preserve. What efforts have land managers taken in those preserves to lower wildfire risk? Ben, is that something you can answer?
I can touch on it a little bit. There have been some efforts to create fire breaks throughout those preserves, and also do, in some cases, prescribe burning in certain areas of the county. One of the reasons why we wanted to do this plan, in addition to just making sure we understood the risk and the opportunities, um, but it does open up opportunities for grant funding to get additional equipment and potentially do additional fire breaks and burns in those preserve areas. And especially, I think, with a greater focus on the wildland urban interface. Those are some of the areas where we face the greatest challenge. So ensuring that there's adequate breaks and opportunities to stop fire before they get to structures is incredibly important. So this plan will help unlock a number of funding opportunities that we hope to pursue in the future.
Thank you, Ben. All right, everyone. With that, it is 6:30. We are really happy with the questions you all asked and with your attendance. We want to thank you very much for giving up your time. We know you all are busy to be here, and so we will post this meeting. If you have friends who you think would be interested, feel free to share when it is available, and I hope you have a great evening. Thank you to all our panelists, and meeting adjourned.